Welcome, everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges as he explores turning the page on his life and yours. Hey, Charlie.
Well, Paul, here we are on April 15, 2020, more than 30 days into some form of quarantine. As we continue to do our shows remotely, we will, for the third time, have a conversation in quarantine with a friend of mine that I haven't spoken with for some time. Today, my guest is Caitlyn Cogan Doemner. After studying at Oxford University and then receiving an MBA from Biola University, Caitlyn co-founded and launched her sales management company in March 2013. In less than 3 years, Paul, they earned their first $1 million. Within 6 years, now she's probably only 28 at this time. Within 6 years, they have generated over $10 million in new revenue for their clients. Their clients now include some of the most prestigious names in the coaching industry, including Deepak Chopra. Caitlyn has also published multiple books, including The Unseen Sales Machine and Sell with a Heart. Caitlyn and I met about 10 years ago at a company in which I was engaged in executive coaching and management development. She was unusually bright, as I recall, and an incredibly intuitive young woman at only 25 years old. And now, 10 years later, hers is a most impressive success story. Caitlyn lives in Apple Valley with her husband, Michael, their 4 kids, 1 cat, and as I understand, 17 chickens. Okay, what do you say, Paul? We get Caitlyn Doemner on the phone and find out what's happening with her. Hello, Caitlyn.
Yes, how are you?
It's Charlie. We are live on the show right now, so no time for chitty-chatting and talking about Paul and the rest of the studio.
No worries. I'm excited to jump right in with you.
Yeah, this is fun. You know, I'm doing this new thing, Caitlyn. I'm doing what I'm calling Conversations in Quarantine. And what I'm doing is calling people that I haven't talked to for months or years and catching up. And we had a little chance to catch up, but my other 2 folks, I really had no time to catch up. And it was just sort of a very conversational interview in which there's really not a lot of script, but we are covering what we're doing in quarantine. And you know, as I've read so much of your stuff lately, you have such incredible ideas. I can't wait till we get to chat.
I'm so glad we get to have this time together, and catch up.
It will be fun. Now, Caitlyn, do you realize that when I made contact with you in mid-March as a result of a Facebook post that we'll talk about later, it had been more than a decade since we last spoke?
I know, that's crazy.
Isn't it? And
right.
You know, and I recall thinking of you as so bright and so intuitive, and how fun it was to talk ideas with you, because we weren't at a location that really fostered progressive ideas.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, progressive in business. They were really good in business. I really like the way they manage people, but there's some progressive thoughts that are a bit different. First of all, what I want to talk to you a bit about, before we really get into any kind of meat or any kind of deep discussion, I just want to talk to you what you've been up to since the last time we worked together, when I was doing executive coaching at a company you were working for. And at that time, you were a 25-year-old single woman. And since then, you've married, had 4 children, raised 17 chickens, written several books, and, you know, kind of you started a sales management company that has earned tens of millions of dollars. How in the world did you accomplish that in 10 years, Caitlyn? And you're still a puppy. You know, I won't say your age, but you can add 10 years on to 25 pretty easily.
It has been a bit of a whirlwind. I think just, you know what, at the time it was just I had a clear idea of what I wanted, And I never bought into the idea that I had to do one or the other. I knew that I wanted a family, and I wanted a really rich marriage, and I wanted kids, and I knew that I wanted to own my own home, and I knew that I wanted to create kind of a life of freedom for myself. Entrepreneurship was almost a falling into it backwards, because when I married my husband, we moved, he was about an hour and a half northeast of Los Angeles. It's kind of in a little podunk town called Apple Valley, and I was suddenly a stay-at-home mom of a 6-year-old stepson, and I almost went crazy those first couple of years wondering, what in the world am I supposed to do with myself? And so I was finishing my MBA and really just sort of flailing around trying to find something that I could do to give back to the world and to use my talents, and started kind of doing consulting, and then connected with my first business partner, and that was sort of how I found my way into sales. He basically had me be his appointment setter, and then he said, well, why don't we go start building some teams? And so we started building some teams, and then all of a sudden I was a sales manager and had never done that before, and then we landed our first big client. We made her $250,000 in 2 weeks' time and proved the model. And
$250,000 in 2 weeks' time. Can I hire you for that? I could use it right now.
Absolutely, yeah. So that was a good case study. That allowed us to get in front of some other bigger names, and just really feel blessed that the journey that we went on, it does feel sort of magical in a lot of respects. There's a lot of learning curves, and there were definitely times where I fell flat on my face and wondered if it was all worth it. But yeah, I would say I wouldn't trade the combination for anything. I have wonderful kids that I love and adore, and I would say it's actually been having babies that's forced my growth to be so strategic. So I know that I have a tendency to be a bit of a workaholic. I love the work that I do and the people that I do it with. And
by the way, I know, try to get a hold of you.
My mother will say the same thing, yeah. But I think having kids, being pregnant, and then nursing and raising kids with the diapers and everything, it's really forced me to grow grow quickly and strategically, so that I have always had to prioritize good profitability in as short a period of time as possible for that time freedom's sake, which actually nowadays is really serving me well, because same thing, I'm now homeschooling 3 kids, and so have even fewer hours than ever before to build my business. But I find that when there are constrictions around my growth, like conditions on the growth, that the growth is so much richer, because I can't just grow in any direction at any speed. I really have to be very focused, like a laser beam, and it always gets done. It always gets done, whether you have 8 hours or 4 hours or 1 hour. Whatever needs to get done will always get done.
Is there any secret to the criteria you use for strategizing your priorities?
Love that question. I tend to always reverse engineer. So I always have a 10, 20, 30-year plan, and then it never ends up looking that way, of course. But there's always a long-term plan that I'm working towards, and then it's really just how does everything align with that long-term goal that I have, and trying to be just ruthlessly, I call it kind of radical prioritization. So there are things in my life that I have not prioritized, like cleaning my house, not a priority for me, but keeping kids alive and keeping businesses growing, like that is a priority. So for somebody who, being in a tidy, organized home, my lifestyle would probably drive them crazy, but that was a trade-off that I was willing to make. And you have to have trade-offs. Recognizing that every time you say yes to something, you're really saying no to something else, and vice versa. So it's just making sure that everything that you're doing is on purpose and in alignment with what you want to create as your life goal in the long run, what you want your life to look like.
You know what I did, I'm going to say around 2015, 2016, is I took a 3-day retreat. at a hotel in Laguna Beach where I had an ocean view. But I took flip charts, I took books, and I was by myself the entire time, except one night because I wasn't that far from home. One night my wife and I had dinner. Other than that, I was completely by myself. And all I did was strategize a new business that I wanted to start. And I was able to just work through that whole process and think about what I wanted it to be, how I wanted it to look, what the deliverables were, who the audience was, and then also to take a critical look at myself. What role do I play, and how does this business serve me? I wanted to look at that, sort of that I really enjoy the business. And man, I'll tell you what, Caitlyn, I don't think there's anything I can recommend to people, especially business people, that you take a 3 or 4 day time, not with your team, but alone. And really just sit and focus, in silence and solitude. I'm big in silence and solitude these days, which the quarantine is helping. But in a positive way, in a very positive way for me.
Yeah, one of my
that was a wonderful time for me. And I haven't done it since for business. I've done it for personal, but I haven't done it for business, I guess maybe because I'm retired. So
you're so good at retirement, Charlie.
I stay busy. Now, you know what? I was going to go. I was moving ahead. There's somewhere I wanted to go. I was wondering. Let's talk practical, so everybody gets an idea of what a successful entrepreneur is doing in this time of quarantine. What is life like in the Doemner household these days of quarantine? I don't imagine you've slowed down at all, but accelerated. So what is your life like?
We have shifted pretty dramatically. So, like I said, we have our 3 little ones at home. So our oldest is 17 and lives with his grandparents. But we have the 6-year-old, the 8-year-old, and the 4-year-old. Oh, yeah, I missed a little baby. So we have a preschooler, a kindergartner, and a 2nd grader. And so they're at home, and every week we go pick up their packets of schoolwork from the school. And I realized mornings really made the most sense. So we basically cleared the decks of everything in the morning. We don't start work until 11 a.m., so that's new. So that's actually given us time to prioritize family time in the morning. So we are waking up a little bit later. The kids get to snuggle with us until 7:30. At 7:30, we start getting ready for the day, and the kids have a certain number of chores that they need to complete before 9 a.m., but if they get done with their chores early, then they get to just have creative time with Legos and paints or whatever they decide that they want, non-screen time, really. Actually, the weather has been beautiful, so we've been playing in the backyard a lot during that morning session. And then from 9 to 11, school.
It sounds like you have a large backyard.
We do. We have about 2.5 acres. So it's really
I guess that's
convenient. Yeah, so we get to kind of roam around and I did a morning hike with my daughter this morning. And so, and then, from 9 to 11 is just schoolwork. Fortunately, they don't have a lot of schoolwork, but it is very hands-on. So usually Michael and I and the 3 kids are all at the dining room table together, and we're kind of tag teaming, getting through those worksheets. And then at 11 o'clock, they go on to educational screen-based activities, where the little one goes down for his nap. And then Michael and I try to fit in about 3 or 4 hours of work. And again, it's sort of when we're both on phone calls, we come out and we never know what the state of the house is going to look like by the end of our time. And then
there's nobody looking after the children. They're kind of on their own.
Yeah, they're kind of making do. They've gotten very independent and reliant. They've started doing science projects on their own. They've started making food on their own. It's sometimes it's a surprise every time we open our office doors and see what's happened while we were gone. So that's been really interesting, just kind of having this time at home where the kids are sort of raising themselves right in the middle of the day. And then usually around 3 o'clock, 3 o'clock, we're trying to get back into family mode. They then get to earn screen time, so that's just fun-based, like video games and things like that. So I've been trying to fit in like an hour of writing in the day during the afternoons. I'm finding it's harder for my brain to work in the same creative and strategic capacity that it used to work. Right now, I think this is the first week where I sort of felt like I've been coming out of survival mode. I'm wanting to work out again. I'm actually starting to have creative thoughts again. But the first couple of weeks of quarantine, it was just stay afloat, right? Just keep treading water and figure out how you're going to get to the next day. So I feel like I'm sort of emerging into something that resembles a new normal. And so writing an article for Forbes was right before this call. And just thinking through what I want to be saying and how I want to be showing up during this time, trying to fit some of that in the afternoon. And then usually it's early dinner, maybe a board game, and reading, and then bedtime, and trying to keep that at a reasonable schedule. But even that's getting pushed back as the days warm up and it's pretty outside and people want to play. So, yeah, that's kind of the...
So, I was going to ask in this, it seems like so much time is developed to work or devoted to work and family, and you have this time to write. What about your personal time of, you are a deep thinker, and, these thoughts just come to your brain. When do you find an opportunity for spending time alone with your mind and letting these thoughts just sort of rise up? Is there an opportunity for that, or is it always sort of a deadline? I've got to get this, so I need to think here and there.
Yeah, I will say carving out that personal time is much harder now than it used to be. I used to have more time for that, but I would say I have always tended to be a producer. It's only recently that I've been sort of shifting into a contemplative, which I know sounds strange, but most of my life I have valued myself for what I can do, what I can create, what I can produce, what can I show for my time. It's actually only been in the last year or so that I've started giving myself permission to just be, and that I was learning that habit before everything kind of fell off the tracks. So I'm trying to find more time for that. I tend to be learner, and input are high on my strengths finder. And so for me, it's when I'm listening to TED Talks, when I'm reading books, when I'm reading articles. So I'm actively consuming content on a very regular basis. And so that usually is what's sparking the connections and the thoughts and the patterns. And then when I write, it rarely do I get to do it on a personal level, like my own Facebook post, but when I'm creating marketing materials and things. So my business really gives me the accountability maybe to start putting ideas onto paper in a constructive way.
You said something in the midst of that really sparked my attention, and that is said you're pursuing or experiencing more of the contemplative experience. How would you define that?
So I had my own kind of 3-day retreat last fall by myself, and I would say failed miserably at it. I was not. It's still a lesson that I'm trying to learn. But doing a lot of journaling, meditation, walks in nature, and just trying to make peace with my own mind, because it's usually racing in 100 different directions. And the more I study ancient thinkers and modern day science, the more I realize that this what you said, the silence and the solitude, these really are critical for creating new neural pathways and getting in touch with your muse and just like being these being states. A whole
redefinite, because we both as Christa calls us, Christianity is our mother tongue, and we both sort of embrace the mother tongue. However, the mother tongue has expanded in the language that she uses and in the experience, in that while the Bible is still very important, if you read it with a different filter and you read it as metaphor and you read the intent of in God and loving God, especially, the Gospel of John is so profound that there's a whole different form of, I'm even reluctant to use the word Christianity. There's a whole different form of faith based in the Christ and in the cross than is normally taken in the, in any institutional church today. That you find them in monasteries and abbeys, and with the Thomas Mertons of the world, who is no longer with us, but just this deeper sort of mysticism that and the irony of the mysticism is it's not esoteric. It sounds esoteric until you really get into it, and it's really mundane and ordinary, and finding the spiritual in our ordinary daily parts of our lives that I'm really attracted to.
I love that phrase, like everything is fodder for our spiritual lives, and no matter good, bad, ugly, beautiful, everything can bring us deeper to ourselves and to our truth. Yeah, I
even take a step further, say there is no such thing as a not a spiritual life, that everything is spiritual. Everything, because if not, then we're assuming that God is not part of everything, and this divine, whatever name you choose to put on this divine and this holy, is with us at all times and in us at all times and in everything we do.
Yeah, I love that notion.
Hey, so let's get to some nitty gritty, because you early in March were a prophet, and you posted. This is what brought us together. And you posted a Facebook post in early March that was titled, now this is early March, this is right at the beginning of COVID, so people are just looking at the negative and the limitations. And you were to think out of that box, and you wrote a post that was titled, and this is surprising for as early as you wrote it, 16 ways the pandemic can actually serve us. Now, I recall at the time I was caught off guard by your positivity, but I was intrigued by your suggestions, which I find today are rather commonplace, or common themes. But at the time, you were one of the very first to tout what we can learn and how our world will change as a result of this crisis. Caitlyn, your thoughts were indeed prophetic genius even, and I took note that even expert futurist, who I really respect, Peter Diamandis, took 3 weeks longer than you did to post the same observations. So what I'm wondering, can you recall the process? What is it? Was it just one of those aha moments, or was there some sort of driver that led you to think of ways that the pandemic might serve us?
Yeah, I think, I had the advantage of just coming out of a kind of a retreat. So we have our own mentor that we work with for business strategy and mindset, and we had just come back. It was like the last event before everything closed down. And so I think I was just in that space of everything is always working out for us. Everything is always serving us. So you're saying that everything is spiritual. I really have a firm belief that everything that happens is for us, and that's kind of how we chatted about, like, is the universe for us or against us? I am so absolutely convinced that the universe is for us on every single level. There is nothing that is not serving us. I've stopped talking about good and bad and started talking about preference and contrast and contraction and expansion. So my whole notion about what is good and what is bad, in the sense, like, I recognize very early on this pandemic is not going to be comfortable. This is absolutely going to be a contractive experience for us, but that doesn't mean that it's not serving us. And so it really starts with this decision, this belief, this commitment to the idea that everything is always serving us. And once you have that decision made, then you can always find evidence to support it. And that's why I think that the decision is really important, because you will create a reality that validates your belief system. And
you
so
will,
if we
no
have,
matter what you believe, you will create a reality
Absolutely.
that will validate your belief system.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes a quite different... How does one get out of that mindset? And one gets into the open mindset of considering, what I love to always consider is that I can be wrong. And so I need to always inspect what I believe and listen openly and reflectively to what others may present.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so that it was that decision, like, guys, I believe that this is serving us. And then it was just, once you give your imagination that open door, your imagination will walk through that door. And so that's where I was just brainstorming and was like, hey, this would be good, and this would be good, and this would be good. I didn't even get to the environmental impact. Somebody else put that on my comments, but I think we're seeing that is one of the easiest ways to see how the Earth is like actively recovering when we just stop traveling. So yeah, that's
I
where
heard
that
there's
article
vibrations in the Earth, and the Earth is slowing down, or some kind of, I didn't read it in detail, but that there are physical results to the planet Earth as a result of what we're doing in quarantine.
Well, smog is clearing. I was reading an article that there is this beach in India that's usually covered with tourists, and because it was free of humans, there were millions more sea turtles that were able to lay their eggs this season than ever before. Things like that, where you just, like Venice, you can now see through the waters of Venice. So it's recognizing that the Earth is designed to clean up messes, but man, it's a beautiful thing when we stop making messes for a little while, and give it a chance to take a breather. So yeah, I that was just one of the things that I was like, yeah, absolutely, I can see how less travel is going to have an immediate impact in a positive way for the environment.
We have, I guess I have so much to talk to you about, and I have producer Paul on Skype, and I'm going to be driving him crazy today, which is not unusual. And he's kind of lifting his hands, and oh God, here's Charlie again. But before we get to our break, I want to quote some thought-provoking words in your really excellent post. And you wrote this: if we can reframe the current experience as 1, a natural event for which 2, we have been specially prepared to handle, and 3, we trust that these trials will deliver a blessing greater than anything we have yet seen. This crisis may be the single most empowering event we have experienced this generation. Are you still believing that 3 or 4 weeks later?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yep.
You know what I want to do? That's a lead-in for our next section, and I'm going to ask that we take a brief break right now, and we will come right back. And I want to get on some of your 16 reasons why what we can learn from this pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hi, this is Charlie Hedges, and you're listening to The Next Chapter with Charlie, with my special guest. Oh, my special guest gets music. My special guest, Caitlyn Cogan Doemner, and she's a highly successful businesswoman who, I love the fact that by 28 years old and 33 months, she made her first $1 million. That's quite impressive. But she wrote a podcast, or not a podcast. She wrote a post on Facebook that says 16 ways a pandemic can actually serve us. She was one of the first to write this, which I'm sure most listeners have heard plenty about. And Caitlyn, I took your 16 and I wanted to narrow it down to 5. Mm-hmm. I was successful at narrowing it down to 10. So let's just kind of go over them quickly, just to give people the idea of what you were thinking when this pandemic really first hit. And this was not number one, but it's my number one, not your number one. Doesn't mean it's most important, but it just came first. And that there is more time for reading and meditation. Now, I certainly have that. Do you have that?
No, that one actually, I have been having less time for reading and meditation. But I will say that this week, that's definitely the top of my list, is I really do want to start picking up my books and scheduling more time, because the kids they're getting into their new routines. So I do think it will be more possible for me to add that in these days.
Yeah, and I think for many of us, with children, it's a whole different story. But those of us without children, I have read that we need to be. It would be not we need to be, but it would be good to be reading in either a new discipline or a new point of view that we can really meditate on and really get good ideas on. I had this in my meditation this morning. I was asked in my meditation, what do you appreciate right now? And ironically, my word that I appreciate right now in the middle of quarantine was freedom. Now that does not seem to work together, yet I have the freedom of no distractions, no people wanting a piece of me, not having to please other people, but just having to, I still have work that I have to do, but I'll get it done when I get it done. And though it is scheduled, and I live on the Terry Hershey rule of a deadline means it's time to get started. So...
No, I would agree with you. I think I'm going to be a little bit sad when we go back to quote unquote normal life. Like
I thought of the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost been kind of like a sabbatical where nobody expects. There are no expectations, and that I think was my next point, is that we get to create this new normal. And what I'm realizing is when I tell people no, I can't, I need to homeschool my kids, and I'm not going to be, well, there's no expectations to go anywhere, obviously. But yeah, it's just, there is such a slower pace. I mean, not in terms of how much needs to get done a day, but just the expectation level is so much lower that there's a lot less external pressure that I'm feeling to do anything other than what I deem important and what I choose to do, that I'm really enjoying that element of this quarantine experience.
I so agree with you on that, and yet I have a couple of concerns. One is, this is going to sound terrible, but as they're beginning to talk about lifting the quarantine, mm-hmm. If it in fact gets lifted, and I don't know to what degree, will we have experienced enough time in quarantine for these great ideas of yours to actuate, or mm-hmm. will we just go back to the old normal instead of a new normal?
Yeah, I've been sort of looking at that on an individual level, because I can't speak for anybody else, but realizing it's taken me 3 weeks to just find my footing with the rug getting pulled out from underneath me, and knowing it takes at least 3 weeks to start new habits, realizing that if the kids were allowed to go back to school next Monday, on Monday, then there's a very good chance that I would just revert back to that old standard and not be intentional about, what do I really want to create? Because there there is a part of me that actually, half the time I get driven crazy by the idea of homeschooling, but half the time I think I'm really loving this. I'm really loving having to spend so many hours with my children, because I'm getting to know them better, and we're having to put systems in place for our house that we've never had to put in place before, and we're having to be better at communication than we've ever been before. And so there are just some really beautiful fruits that are starting to ripen, to your point, and I don't know if I'll be able to sustain them if I'm given the freedom and also, to your point, the pressure to return to the old standard.
Yeah, we'll have to see how that comes out. I hope not. Let's go to our next one that we can just do quickly, but this is demonstrating how important it is and how capable we are to allow work from home solutions, that hopefully remote work, we can see, it's working. We don't always have to be in the same office together, that there are a lot of jobs that can be done remotely.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I think that to this point, and then to the next point was it's changing how we work and educate and live virtually. I do think that we are going to see some permanent shifts in how we buy, so how we consume, whether it's education or products, and how we work, how we produce. And so I think that our generation especially is going to just sort of assume that flexibility is an option.
Wait a minute. Our generation. We are like 3 generations apart.
So for my generation, as millennials, I think that we're going to, we've always preferred flexible work schedules, but now I think we can point to a season like, we have, I guess, a reason to kind of mandate work from home solutions and that freedom and flexibility that we're searching for. And so I think we're going to see a permanent shift into how we consume and how we produce. And companies, businesses, they're going to have to get on board with that notion if they're going to stay relevant.
Let's hope, because so many of our companies are run by people my age, or run by baby boomers who just don't get it. They think that there's no other way to work except in an office and together, and where I can spy you and literally guide you through the process. I hope we can get rid of that. So we covered work, covered here. Schools are having to figure out how to offer education online. We've had online, but now we've had online education in the past, but now it's at a whole nother level. And according to the reports, we're not going back to education till the end of this year, or end of this school year, and perhaps even the beginning of next school year. Mm-hmm. So that is going to have to happen.
I've had a lot of thoughts on sort of the way that kind of for education, when we shifted to things like Netflix, right? Blockbuster disappeared. I'm realizing this, and then even television, right? When you introduced TiVo and you didn't have to watch commercials, television had to shift how they did business. I think that's what we're seeing here in the educational sector, is that education is going to have to shift if it's going to still be relevant. Did you know that Harvard is now offering 67 of its classes for free through the end of quarantine? You can literally go get a Harvard education online right now. So it's realizing, and as I'm thinking about my kids and recognizing, I really love this intimacy of homeschooling and the ability to customize it to them. And I also don't know that I want to be an expert in every single topic. Where this is showing up is in Spanish. So we bought the Rosetta Stone, which again is for free for 3 months. So we get to try out Rosetta Stone for the summer.
Sure.
But there's this italki is a platform where you can find yourself a native speaking tutor, And so the plan is we're going to do Rosetta Stone lessons throughout the week and then have a scheduled, just conversation time with our tutor where we get to build a relationship and have conversations. And now I'm beginning to think, well, how could I customize my entire kid's educational experience? How could I put the most amazing experts in the world to create this customized curriculum for my kids and then offer Zoom-like support from anywhere in the world? I mean, you could have PhD people leading elementary school classes on just a much broader level than has ever been seen before. So I think we have the opportunity, like Uber moving into the taxi cab industry, right? We have a chance to disrupt an industry so that we get better quality results with a lot less expense and a lot more freedom and flexibility and customer service. So it's just, that one will be really interesting to see how that plays out.
And that's exciting for me because I would like to do continuing education, but I don't want to go to a university or a JC, hassle with the parking, hassle with the administration, go in where I'm 50 years older than everybody else.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I don't fit behind those desks anymore. That's just not going to work. No, desks are not going to work. Okay, what I want to do here, because I want to get into something more important, not more important, but equally as important, and I want to just go to my last two reasons that you put if you're 16, and I would encourage everybody to check out on Facebook, Caitlyn, Cogan, Doemner, and look up the 16, what did you call them? 16 ways the pandemic can actually serve us. And it's really an excellent post. But a couple more. One is I like this, Caitlyn. We will prioritize what really matters and remember that what's most important to us are our loved ones. Mm-hmm. You know, we always say that, and yet people who are dying always say that at death, and they really mean that at death. But for some reason, we are Americans. We live the American dream. We're capitalist. We are consumerist, and we have such high value for those activities that we lose the fact that at the end of the day, what's really important is our loved ones and the others that we have served, how we have made a difference on this planet. Mm-hmm. I think it really calls for us to take a 3-day retreat and think about that. And I do actually think that that's another benefit of this being a lethal disease that's forcing us to be in quarantine. I don't think we are accustomed to thinking about death on a regular basis, but there is something that really, really clarifying about death being a possibility, which it always is. We just don't always think about it. And it kind of, that sense of our own mortality, I think, really puts into perspective everything that we're using. Time is the only finite commodity on this planet, right? And that it's just how are we spending that commodity and making sure we're spending it where it counts. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my last one is probably not all. Well, it's very meaningful to me because I'm involved in a global international charity in Uganda, and we are recognizing that we are indeed a global species. Every choice we make affects everyone else on the planet. We don't think that, but that is really true, and hopefully that can make us more responsible world citizens. I really like that, Caitlyn.
Yeah, that one is really significant to me, too, because I think the world is getting smaller, right? You were realizing, especially moving to a virtual reality, that we can contact, we have more in common with everyone else on the planet than we've ever had in common with them before, and realizing that you may be concocting something here, but the impact, the ripple effects can be worldwide, and recognizing that we need to start thinking as a global entity, and because we're going to have, I think, even more dramatic challenges to solve than COVID-19.
Oh, yeah. And I want to add one more of my own that I am hoping that we learn through this, yet with looking at the news, at the media of late, I'm not really hopeful on it, but I was hopeful at a time that our vitriolic and divisive political situation can help our leaders see that working together for the good of the country rather than the good of the party is really essential. And I think we got that for a while, and now we're getting into the blame game, and each trying to position themselves as better equipped, and we're in a national emergency, and we can't come together to work as a nation. And I was hoping that
we're a national emergency that's only 7 months away from an election, so it's sort of putting everything in perspective of that, which makes me sad. But
it is. But it's politics, and this is not. Yeah. This was what makes me, frustrated with our political system, because it's now become a matter of politics over a matter of the essentiality of our lives and the way we live our lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a dramatic lack of leadership from the people who say they're leading us. Mm-hmm.
Okay, we've got 7 minutes to get to what could be the most important part of our discussion. Sure. In your mind and my mind, and in your post, again, you wrote, I'm quoting your post a lot, an experience is meaningless unless we assign it a meaning. And I believe that this crisis is the best possible thing that could happen for our planet at this point in time. What did you have in mind when you wrote that? Do you recall?
Yeah, so well, I guess it comes back to the idea that everything that happens is the best possible thing that could happen for any person who's experiencing it that moment. This just happens to be a global phenomenon. So it must be the best possible thing for our planet, because the entire planet is experiencing it. So if something happens to me, let's say I get cancer, right, or I catch COVID, whatever that looks like, that must be, and this is where you have to kind of just make this decision that the universe is for you or against you, and that literally informs your interpretation of everything else that you experience. So what was really helpful for me when I first started introducing to this concept was the kind of Zen story of this Chinese farmer who his mare runs away, and the villagers said that's a terrible thing, and he says, how do we know if it's a terrible thing? And then the next day the mare returns with a wild stallion, and the villagers say, well, this is a wonderful thing, and he says, how do we know? And then the stallion throws his son, and his son breaks his leg, and his villagers say, oh my gosh, this is such a terrible thing, and he says, how do we know? And then a week later there's a draft for the war, and his son is exempt because he doesn't have to go into war because his leg is broken. And so it's just this cycle of life that the thing, if we think that something is not good, it's because we haven't gotten to the end of the story yet. So if you are in the middle of a circumstance that you are interpreting and assigning a meaning that this is bad, this is negative, this is not serving me, then you simply haven't lived through it long enough. And if given enough time, all things shall be well and shall be well and shall be made well, right? Like this is the way that everything plays out for our good and the highest good of all involved. And so just that commitment to see everything as the best possible thing that could be happening right now, even with horrific things like the Holocaust, right? If you live through far enough, if you get distanced enough from the experience, you can always figure out why that was the best possible thing that could have happened for our society and our civilization at that point in time.
So, Caitlyn, you're 35 years old. Where did you get such wisdom?
I read a lot of ancient literature.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, okay. That was my undergrad.
I'm going to go in. I'm moving kind of quickly through this really important part, But in the second part of our discussion, I'd like to talk about the role of faith in a post-religious society, because you stated that you included the question, is the universe for us or against us? And that this is not a question that can be answered by logic or data. It can only be answered by faith. And so you talk about the role of faith in a post-religious world. You personally believe that the question of the universe is the universe for us or against us is not a question that can, as I said, be answered with logic or data, but faith. Tell me about that. What does faith mean?
So when I said it can't be answered with logic and data, it simply means that there are certain elemental principles that have to be decided upon, and then you use them to build the rest of the worldview. So in Euclid's geometry, right, there are the axioms, the things that cannot be proven that you use to prove everything else. And this is one of those things. So the data can't be used to determine whether or not the universe is for you or against you, because you will always find the data to support either belief. And that's where you have to start with this as the question, and the question has to be a choice. So when I talk about faith is the realm of beliefs, and beliefs at their core are really just choices. This is how
a priori decisions.
They are a choice of how I choose to interpret the world, and we can change those decisions, right? When we have different data that supports it. So it sort of becomes this loop, if you will, where we have interpretations that have usually been handed down to us because of our upbringing. And so that's why I think it's post-religious. A lot of us have moved away from the religion that we grew up with, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a core truth that there is something higher and wiser than us that is guiding this experience, whether you call it God or universe or infinite intelligence, whatever it is that you choose to describe the divine. I feel like there is this awakening that is happening where we're realizing that we are not alone. And then when you realize you're not alone, you have to then decide, is this a friendly or hostile? Not aloneness, right? Is it paranoia, is believing that everything is conspiring against you. Pronoia is everything conspiring for you.
I've never heard of pronoia.
And so it's this idea that you have to make that decision, and then everything else, and that has to be an act of faith, because not believing in God is just as much an act of faith as believing in God, since existence is not something that can be proven one way or another. You cannot prove that something does not exist. You can prove that you can have a really strong likelihood that something does exist, right? I'm pretty sure my husband exists. But I can't actually prove that if I go out. Like, there's no real easy way to prove, and you certainly can't disprove existence. So I always tell my children, like, you can't prove that fairies don't exist. So you might as well assume that they do. That way you're not surprised when you meet one, right? And so I feel like it's the same way about God. If you can't prove that he doesn't exist, it probably makes actually more sense to believe that he does. And then moving forward from that notion, kind of how do you construct your worldview? And
yes.
if you look at the results that come, it's very practically and pragmatically beneficial to you on numerous levels to assume that everything is for you rather than against you, that it's friendly instead of hostile. And so because, like I said earlier, your brain will create a reality to support your belief system. So if you think that everything is working out for you, you have a statistically higher likelihood that things will actually work out for you than if you don't and you think that things are against you. So I think that there are really good, like, if you're just looking at it, like without any emotion, believing in God is a more rational principle than not believing in God. And practically, it's it's just going to be more useful to you on a very practical day-to-day level to believe that God is beneficial and positive and for you than to believe that he's against you and doesn't support you. So, yeah, that's my argument for why we need to have faith in a benevolent higher intelligence, even when we let go of the old dogmas that we might have grown up with.
And this is your response to a post-religious world, in that it's more of what Richard Rohr calls a perennial theology that is based on what many religions think, and God has different names and different ways, but that this essence or this entity does in fact exist, is teleological, has a purpose, created the earth and is involved in the earth. And I just looked up, that the verse we all go toward out of the Bible in the book of Hebrews, which is a brilliant high Greek, very high Greek, written by a very intelligent author, that faith is the confidence that we have, hope for what will actually happen, and it gives us insurance in things we cannot see. So it's really a lot about hope and belief in something greater than ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And I love that word confidence, because when you break it down, it's confides, which means with faith. So when you're walking with confidence, you're walking with faith.
Great idea. Caitlyn, you are awesome.
Thanks, Charlie. You too. I'm so glad we got to have this call.
Yeah, that is great. And I want to thank you for so much for spending time with me. Now, you have so many contact things, Facebook and all, but do you have a website that people get in touch with you, or is it you just prefer Facebook and Twitter and those?
Yeah, for right now, Facebook's probably the easiest. Caitlyn Caitlyn Cogan Doemner. Just typing my name into Facebook will find me. If you want to send me an email, my business is the easiest one. Caitlyn@salesmap.me is the best email to get a hold of me. But yeah, I'd love to hear from people of what they got out of this and kind of just think better about the world.
Okay, that's great. Hi to Michael, the kids, and the chickens.
Will do.
Except the ones you're going to eat.
Yep.
So thank you. Thanks again, Caitlyn. You've been great.
My pleasure, Charlie. Thank you.
Thank you. I also want to thank our listeners for tuning in to The Next Chapter with Charlie, and be sure to check us out at our website, thenextchapter.life. Until next, this is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.
You've been listening to The Next Chapter with Charlie, right here in Orange County's only community radio station, OCTalkRadio.net.